Have you ever been so inspired by something that you felt compelled to do it yourself? Maybe you listened to a rock band like Nirvana and decided to learn how to play the guitar. Or maybe you saw Da Vinci's Mona Lisa and decided to pick up painting. Or maybe you saw something patriotic and decided to sculpt 22-foot tall heads of the presidents of the United States. Well, that's just what one artist did. But if he was so inspired to sculpt such political icons, why have they sat rotting with so much neglect? Why do they look more like portraits of Dorian Gray than the once revered symbols they represent? And why has almost no one heard about this or seen it with their own eyes? Well, that's what this episode of Locals Only is about. What are the ruins of President Heads Park? Now, this story is nothing new. Dozens of other channels spoke about the history of this park in depth already. However, I wanted to give a more updated and personal point of view on the subject, me being from Virginia as well. Our story begins with David Adickes, talented Texan sculptor and painter extraordinaire, who's most known for his 67-foot statue of Sam Houston in 1994. You know, the Houston that Houston's named after. Anyways, after a trip to Canada, David drove past something he'd seen pictures of many times, but never saw in person. On that drive home back to Texas, David saw for the first time Mount Rushmore. While captivated by its majesty, he decided he could do better and started right away on creating his very own Rushmore.
I was overwhelmed by the majesty of it. Driving to Texas, the idea occurred to me to do a park with all the presidents, big enough to get in front of and look in the eyes rather than from a quarter-mile away.
Now, David spent some time looking for just the right place to rest his heads. With the capital being so difficult to settle land and permits, Williamsburg, Virginia appeared in his sights. It was suggested that Haley Newman be his financial backer.
The people of York County recommended he and I talk. They probably said, we had a guy crazy enough to do Water Country USA, maybe he'd be crazy enough to do something else.
And sure enough, he was. Newman was already locally famous as one of the country's largest water park owners. He and Adickes got talking about their own American monument. Newman was not initially convinced, though, it was going to be profitable, so they decided to pivot to more of an educational point of view for tourists. Newman spoke to several teachers, and in his words, a national council of scholars, to ensure that the park was not only a beautiful one, but an educational one, to draw field trips from schools and visiting families. For the next 5 years, Adickes carved and molded these statues, with each taking approximately 6 weeks to finish by hand. There was also a rumor about George H.W. Bush being the only president to model personally, and another rumor about Bill Clinton's hair being extremely difficult for him to get just right. While it's said that people were very impressed by the construction, locals were not the least bit impressed with this idea of a park being near them. York County officials initially tried to block the park's opening by requiring costly, special use zoning permits. Frustrated with this, Adickes and Newman took the county to court and won. But while the dispute was going on, Adickes actually opened his first President's Park near Deadwood in South Dakota. That's right, there was more than one President's Park in the country, big heads and all. In fact, there were going to be 4. Adickes had special molds constructed to make duplicate models and could have made as many as he liked. So there was the one near Deadwood in South Dakota, which was ran by none other than Adickes himself. The one in Williamsburg in Virginia was ran by Newman. And there was one in Florida, which failed to open, and a rumored 4th in New Orleans. However, like all presidencies, good or bad, they all come to their end eventually. And each park closed in the middle of their second term in 2010. Though the owners blamed the economy, most people who visited the park acknowledged there just wasn't that much interest to keep it open. In fact, Adickes was so desperate for people to come visit his park, he started offering anyone who passed by 50-cent beer vouchers, which included several bikers passing through.
They're there for the women and the beer and to compare each other's tattoos and bikes.
Very few would walk past the bar and down to the 3,000-foot path of the presidents. After South Dakota's park's closure, by 2015, various RV parks and hotels in the Dakotas held on to the presidential statues, but no longer together or in their original glory. Which brings us back to Virginia. Why is there still what seems to be a park opened, but with derelict and decrepit presidential elects? Why won't this park seem to die? You see, in 2013, after Howard Hankins was tasked with reducing the sculptures to rubble, he just couldn't bring himself to do it and spent tens of thousands of dollars to bring them back to his house for private storage. But how do you move not just one, but 42 of these several-ton plaster-molded presidents? If you were tall enough to see the top of their heads now, you would see that each one has the top of its head broken to expose the metal. After it got attached to a crane, he slowly rocked them off their glued foundations until they could be lifted onto a flatbed. 3 weeks later, all the president's men gathered on his land. Lincoln, ironically, was the only one who had trouble being transported, as he now has 2 spots of damage, one on the top of his head and one on the back. Also, interestingly enough, Ronald Reagan's statue was struck by lightning and is missing part of his eyebrow now. To this day, the new park sits privately and quietly, serving all those willing to pay to see these presidents lay in ruin. But gone are the days of trespassing and getting a peek without anyone knowing, as they have security and lots of cameras. And good luck getting tickets, as they cost a little more than you'd think, and they sell out fast. In 2017, National Geographic showed a video in which Mr. Hankins explained he hoped to remodel the statues for a future park. However, I think that entirely misses the point of why people care now. And I also think Howard understands this as well. People used to trespass on the land, especially at night, just to confirm if this was really true. A graveyard of all the presidents' heads. I think what makes this version of the park special, and why this one is succeeding where the other failed, is that it is so mysterious and strange. We're not used to seeing ruins of our own time, especially of figures we saw in real life, or even elected. If Mr. Hankins were to restore these, they would lose all their character, all their allure. Why have another Mount Rushmore when we can have something more original? And why have a monument when we can have our own ruins? If you want to see more content like this, please consider liking and subscribing. That way you can let YouTube know and they'll let me know. Once again, this is Patrick from Locals Only saying, thanks for watching.